Thank you both for joining us on the Hangout. We're really, really happy to have both of you here. And we thought we'd start the chat with introductions, really. So let's make it simple. Charlie, why don't you start just introducing yourself?
My name's Charlie, Charlie Martin. I'm a racing driver. I've been competing for about 15, 16 years now. And I'm also an LGBTQ plus activist. I'm very proud to be openly transgender in my industry, in my sport, and I've been trying to use my profile to try and create more acceptance and awareness, really, since it came out in 2018.
Natalie Washington. I'm a trans woman, and I guess I just about call myself a footballer.
Okay.
You know, I've played football kind of all my life. I say all my life. When I was actually quite young, I didn't really play football very much at all, and I guess I came into it a bit later than a lot of people. But for me, it's always actually been quite tied up with my gender identity. Growing up in the 1980s in England, you know, the kind of growing up, you know, being sort of socialised as a boy, if you like, I felt I was expected to play football, but I didn't really kind of get into the game. But then as I got a bit older, I think I almost kind of got into football as like a defence mechanism against people who would say I wasn't sort of masculine enough.
You both say you knew quite early, but you came out quite late, you would say so? Like,
yeah.
Why is that? Is that you didn't really have any role models? Or?
I vividly remember when I was about 18, when I lived on my own for the first time, and I was able to, I guess, have a bit more time to think about these things. That was the time when I kind of accepted to myself that this... I still at that point don't think I could really use the terminology, and in fact the terminology was probably different then. But I think I accepted there was something there then. I remember making a conscious decision to say, right, and I'm going to park this at the back of my head for the rest of my life because it's going to cause me more problems than it's going to solve. And that was very much how I felt, say, in the early 2000s. And so I didn't come to actually sort of coming out to anyone else until, I guess, 10 years later, when frankly there was a few difficult things went on in my life. I had a couple of redundancies from work, you know, I lost my job twice in a year, and I had a few other difficult things going on, and I just kind of, I guess it kind of broke me to a point, and then I was like, okay, now I have to deal with this, and now I have to start talking about it, because to not do so is going to be, is now going to be more harm than not dealing with it.
I think much the same as Natalie. Growing up in the 1980s, there was just no visibility at all. So if I saw a trans person, it was like a drag queen in Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, or some kind of abstract character that I couldn't relate to. So I never was really able to understand what transitioning might look like for me in reality in my life. And I think, yeah, again, I just, you know, like you, Natalie, I just compartmentalised a lot of my feelings. I did actually come out to a group of my friends and my mum when I was about 11 years old, and that was obviously a massive thing for me, and I wouldn't say it necessarily went really badly, but I just didn't really know how to... I didn't have the confidence to actually act on any of the things that I felt at that point in time. I think if I was that age now, in the world that we live in, and you know, just a higher proliferation of trans visibility, it probably would have gone very differently for me. As it was, I kind of kept everything to myself for a long, long time, and actually, the thing that really changed it for me was YouTube, because that's where, for the first time, I just discovered all these other people who were trans, who I could actually relate to.
It's those sort of positive, authentic representations, isn't it, where you see actually real people telling their own stories.
Yeah.
And suddenly you say, oh, actually, I can see something of myself in this person.
When I came out, I can just imagine how scary it must have been to really take that decision to come out. I felt it was scary to come out as homosexual. And for us, it's like, yeah, we take the decision to come out, but then that's also it. For you two, it's you take the decision to come out, and then there is a whole process afterwards with the transition.
What would you say that your feelings were after you've transitioned? We can relate it to sport as well, because I've heard you, Charlie, talking a little bit about for example, your performance in sport changing after you transition. I found that really fascinating to hear about. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
I think there's no way I could be doing the things I'm doing now in my sport at the level that I'm doing had I not gone through the process of transition. It really is as simple as that in terms of how it's helped me to just unlock my potential. Like in my case, I just didn't even know really who I was. That's such a fundamental thing that filters into all aspects of your life and your behaviour. And when you're trying to be your best in sport, every decision, everything that you do, it all somehow comes back to who you are as a person, how you feel in your life, how comfortable you feel in your skin, all these things. And you just can't be the best person that you need to be when you doubt yourself on the most basic level. I sometimes say to people, and I try to explain living in denial. And I think it's like when you're trying to do something on your computer and you've got a program running in the background and it's slowing everything down, that's kind of what it feels like. I remember when I started transition, I'd come out and just feeling like I had so much more clarity of thought and space in my head because I wasn't using physical energy to, suppress part of who I was anymore.
It's a great point you make about sort of the way that we limit ourselves because, if you imagine you're spending a lot of your mental capacity trying to deny parts of yourself, you're holding yourself back. And certainly before, I didn't feel able to learn and grow through, for example, vulnerability so much. It was much harder to challenge myself and to accept that there were things I could do better or accept that there was, ways in which I could grow because I was trying to hide this thing about myself that I wasn't prepared to reckon with. And so being able to get that out of the way and be absolutely authentic and kind of get it all on the table, if you like, and say, look, this is me and I'm a human being who's going to try and I have flaws and there's things I'm not good at and I'm trying to grow and I'm trying to get better at things. Really a release in terms of like the way I could be honest with myself. Yeah. And I think that plays out in so many. My personal relationships are stronger than they used to be. I'm more effective in all sorts of ways. My football, my work, the way I can relate to people is markedly different because I'm not trying to kind of manage this piece of myself that I didn't want to admit to.
I felt a little bit like that when I came out. There's a bit of freedom that you can be really honest to yourself about who you are. Obviously, afterwards there is still like obstacles and stuff, but just the fact that you can be true to yourself, that's the most important thing, I think.
And just imagining it from the other side. Imagine if you and I wouldn't have been able to be open about our relationship in our sport, for example. I think that would have reflected on our sporting performances. Yeah. I don't think we would have become as successful as we have been if we would have felt in our early 20s when we became a couple that we couldn't be open. I really do think it has such an effect on your performance, how you're feeling. How would you guys say that your sport accepted you or didn't accept you when you transitioned and when you came out as transgender?
When I started to come out in my personal life, I was still playing in men's football. And I made a decision to stop playing because particularly as I started to kind of experiment with a little bit more with changing parts of my appearance to deal with feelings of dysphoria, I started to feel not particularly safe, I guess, in that environment, in a men's football, sort of a grassroots men's football environment, because things like shaving your legs at that level, like a lot of people have a lot to say about that because that's apparently not not very popular with a lot of the men that play at that level, which it shouldn't be, but that's the case. That's the situation we're working in. And so I stopped playing football, and I actually thought that's probably going to be it for me in terms of playing, maybe still be able to play the odd five-a-side game here or there, but I thought playing at any sort of competitive level, that will probably be it for me because the age I was getting to and so on as well. And so I stopped. But then actually, when I watched the World Cup in Canada in 2015, I got really inspired, thinking I really want to get back into this game. I really want to start playing football again. So I reached out to my local club, which happens to be a club that had a women's team 10 minutes from my house, which even back then, and moderately recently, is not as common as it is now in this country. So I was lucky, and I reached out to them, and I was just completely honest and said, look, I'm a trans woman. Would it be cool if I came down and started training with you? I don't know how easy it's going to be for me to play, but I'd like to just get kicking a ball around again, you know. And they said, yeah, fine, come down. We don't know the rules either, but we'll work something out. And they were really good, and actually that was a really important moment for me, because had that reaction been more negative, then that probably would have made up my mind that, yeah, this is football done for me. I
mean, that's amazing, because it is like that, you say that first point of contact sometimes can set the tone for everything that comes after it. You know, motorsport is one of the very few sports that's mixed. There's no segregation, so there was no issue for me in the terms of, you know, am I allowed to race, you know, in one category or another, but it was more just a sport where there was no queer visibility. And so going back into that, just like Natalie, I gave up for about a year, because I just thought, well, no one's gonna accept me in this space. And actually, one of the things that really drew me into the sport, aside from, you know, racing cars, was that it was an amazing community of people. It was really welcoming, and I loved that. And the idea that would get flipped on its head, and I wouldn't feel, I'd feel rejected by that community, was almost just easier for me to accept that was the case than go back and have that actual lived experience. It wasn't easy at all, going back initially. You know, I owe a lot to just a handful of about 7 or 8 of my closest friends who really supported me and helped me get through probably that first year. I don't think people necessarily realise, you know, that first day that I walked back into the paddock, the significance of something that might have seemed quite, you know, like a small thing to them coming over, giving me a hug. Oh, it's great to see you. You're going to be back next spring. We really want to, you know. I don't think people necessarily appreciate the importance of that moment down the line, because I wouldn't have gone back the next year if they hadn't done that. And so, yeah, it was really difficult.
You both really tell us that the environment is extremely important, that you are in, that it's inclusive. And I think that's something that's really important to understand, how important it is, that you feel like, okay, I want to come back next year, I want to go to this club and play football.
For me, it makes me so sad, the cases that I do hear where people stop playing a certain sport because they don't feel welcome, or they don't feel like they're included, or they aren't included. And that makes me like genuinely really sad and angry that some people are robbed to feel the joy of sport because of who they are and what they identify with, etc. I just think it's so important that we can, keep sport as inclusive as possible. But we can start with the football side of it. Like, what do you think football need to do to, women's football is inclusive, but to stay inclusive and to get even more inclusive?
A lot of people think of the women's game as this automatically inclusive place, but it's not automatically inclusive. It's inclusive because people have put in the work to do the right things, and we need to keep it that way by making sure that we see what are the things that are working, and how do we make sure that we don't lose that as, you know, participation increases and money increases and all these things. You know, that inclusion needs to be at the heart of it. So I think what football needs to do and needs to keep doing is, I guess, one thing like we're doing now, right? Listening to the stories of people who have had experiences of being excluded and being included, and what's worked and what hasn't, giving those a profile and a platform so that people can learn from it. I think we need to make sure, I was going about representation, but representation is key. You know, we need to make sure there are women in decision-making positions who can champion the women's game. We need to make sure there are LGBTQ people, you know, people from all sorts of ethnic backgrounds involved in decision-making, so that we can go, again, sort of champion those different experiences in the game.
One of the things that's been fantastic with Motorsport UK, who are the governing body in the UK, set up an EDI committee a few years ago to look across the board at all areas of inclusion. And so there's various subcommittees, one of which for LGBTQ inclusion I'm really proud to sit on. And it's that case of, listening to people's experiences within the sport.
So Natalie, tell us a little bit about the campaign Football versus Transphobia.
What we're about is really just trying to make football a safer, more welcoming place for transgender people. And it's at every level. So obviously playing is part of the picture, but actually a lot of people involved in football are not playing, or they're not primarily playing. So a lot of people, for example, are going to watch games. So we do work with clubs at all sorts of levels around, training stewards to use inclusive language, training people to understand what good facilities might look like. We do work with supporters clubs, much like Football v Homophobia does, to kind of pair people up with people that they can go to games with so they can feel a bit safer, perhaps if it's their first game after coming out, or they wanted to go and watch their team for years and they couldn't do that. We do work with coaches, with media and so on around how to speak to people in more inclusive ways, how to, change the way that you carry out sort of training exercises, or the way that you might interview people to help trans people feel safer in those environments. So there's a whole big picture. But what we're also trying to do is kind of raise the profile of lots of people in the game, no matter what they're doing. There's actually quite a lot of football writers, for example, in the UK at the minute who are trans women. There's some trans men as well. So it's about raising the voices of these people as well, so that, going back to what we said earlier about people need to hear more from trans people, it's ticking that box of people hearing more from trans people. We've had some really good support from lots of clubs all over the country, all sorts of level, in the women's game, in the men's game, in the sort of the LGBT inclusive game, who really want to see what they can do better, and how they can connect more with the transgender people who are out there wanting to get involved in the game but don't feel quite confident enough to do so at the moment.
There are so much noise in the world, so we have to make sure that the nice voice and the nice noise is the loudest, louder than the angry people who are always going to be angry and going to make a lot of noise. Mostly on social media, it feels like that's where all the negativity stems from.
How are you coping with, the negative comments on social media and all this? I mean, you're both role models, and when you're role model, you will always get good things, and you will always also get the bad comments.
It is really upsetting when you hear things and when you read things like that. I just try to take a step back, and I try to focus on the relationships and the interactions that I have in the physical world. I think no one's ever been unkind to me in the physical world in that way, and I think a lot has to be said about that. People feel free to write what they write when there's no accountability online.
I mean, that's the same when we play football. There's always criticism, but we always have to be rational about that criticism and also have the focus on the right thing, like you say. I think that's a really good point, actually.
Like focusing on the feedback and the voices that matters to you, so you know that the trolls will always be there, but is that people in your personal life, is it people you have a relationship with? No, so they don't even know you either. And I think that is a massive thing to sway people and change people's minds, is to lift you guys as individuals and tell your individual stories, for people to listen to your individual stories, that you are human beings with emotions, with everything that comes with that. And I hope that, the more these stories come out there, the more people we can change and turn, and we can create a better understanding. I think that is something we feel as well. Like, we've been out as a couple for a long time, and we also there's also going to be a lot of people thinking we don't, a couple don't belong in women's football, we shouldn't be together, we shouldn't be out gay, etc. And
there will always be people who don't understand and don't want to try to understand either, unfortunately. Because I think if everyone tried to understand and tried to see things from others' perspective, I think it would be so much easier to just accept everyone, to be honest.
I actually try to kind of, I suppose, separate a lot of my activism and so on from my actual football on a Sunday. But also, I worry a little bit about dragging that side of my life into activism, where perhaps people there don't want that. I mean, someone who plays at the same level as me has had a protest at one of her matches, where people have come with banners and protested her playing football. And, you know, of course, there's 17, 18-year-old women there, you know, making their debut on this occasion, having to deal with this distraction, and I don't want that at my football matches, and I don't want my club to have to deal with that, and I don't want them to kind of get dragged into the online noise. Now, people can easily find out what club I play for and that kind of stuff, but that's been quite separate for me, semi-deliberately, because I didn't want that to get dragged into it, but also kind of wanted that little oasis from the noise where I can just go and put my phone in my bag in the dressing room and leave it there for 3 hours on a Sunday and not think about what's going on.
I like to think I'm a very positive person, and I try to come across in a positive way and communicate a positive message. And I find that for the most part, that's, you know, that goes well, because people, if you're trying to tell someone, if you're trying to educate people and create more empathy and trying to create that human connection in a way that, you know, you're trying to reach people and turn them into allies, then if you're telling them something positive in a good way, people are far more likely to be receptive to it. It's best to just try and, I don't know, put your best foot forwards and be the best version of yourself. Yeah. And if you're trying to be a role model to other people, I think you have a bit of accountability to, you know, to do that as well, because people are looking up to you.
That is ultimately what sport is. It is a little bit of an escape from the real world, and when you're doing your sport, when you're competing or playing on a Sunday, like, you forget everything else about the world and you're just there. And I think that's what is the beauty of sport, and what we talked about earlier, the fact that some people aren't included into that. It's something that it's just not acceptable, and I think everyone should be allowed to experience the joy of being included in a sport and what that does to people. We've touched a little bit on the importance of allyship. I think both of your stories, you've proven, or it was proven, that having allies around you made things a lot easier. And me and Pernille, we also understand the importance of allies in terms of us coming out as homosexual, but we want to know how we can be better allies for the trans community.
I think just hearing people's stories and you know, there's no substitute for actually understanding people by meeting them face to face and marching with people. When I was at Trans Pride London last year, you know, it was amazing to see it, like a pretty difficult time for the community. Just, I think it was like 80,000 people or something, or maybe something like that, but just such an outpouring of love and so many allies there. And, you know, okay, things like that aren't happening every day, but to be there with these people was a really profound experience.
Standing up for people when they're not there, insofar as, you know, when you hear things, and this goes for anyone doing anything and anywhere in life, if you hear things that you think that's probably not true, or that sounds like that's a bit of an unfair reading of the situation, then challenge things and speak up and say, oh, actually, you know, that's not true, or that's not my experience, is always quite powerful. And yeah, just lending your voices to those out there supporting trans people, and being vocal where possible about a belief that trans people have a right to exist in society, and that our identities are real, and that we're not a danger to people. You know, I think that's really, really powerful.
Another thing, obviously, is you know, using the correct pronouns. I mean, I had a really difficult time with this when I was coming out in quite early days of my transition, when I got to a point where I was passing as the gender that I identify as, and my friends would still accidentally misgender me. And aside from just my own frustration, you know, I'd have situations where I'm talking to someone that I don't know, that I've just met, and my friend walks up and misgenders me in front of them, and it's like that person's just outed you in the worst possible way. And it's like it's probably a very little thing. That person doesn't realise what they've done. You know, they've not done it on purpose, but it's so difficult, because you can, you know, suddenly, like, I didn't want to disclose that I was trans at that moment in time, and I feel like then I'm having to do that in some way. And I think it just really hopefully reinforces why using the correct pronouns that people identify with is so important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think, like, additionally, it's a good way of showing that you're wanting to be inclusive and you're wanting to meet people where they are. You know, for example, if you're not sure what someone's pronouns might be because you've not heard them referred to or something, then just asking shows that you care about how that person wants to be referred to, right? And it's a good way of showing that you are someone who is safe for that person to be around. And I think that's a really important thing that often gets overlooked as well.
Normalizing. That's always what we come back to. Like, we just want to be us. Like, no matter who you are, who you love. Yeah, you just want to be.